was the kind of winter night when nothing should have been moving out there. The wind was sharp, the snow thick enough to swallow every sound. I was sitting by the fire when I heard it. A faint, uneven tapping at the door. Not a knock, not really. More like something too weak to try again. When I opened it, the cold hit me like a wall. And there, lying against the threshold, was a small figure covered in frost and fur. A child, barely breathing, half buried in snow. I thought I'd seen everything these woods could show a man. But nothing prepared me for what I was about to carry inside. Tom Walker was 63 years old, a retired wildlife photographer who'd traded the noise of the city for the stillness of the northern Montana woods. His cabin sat miles from the nearest road, an old timber home built long before he bought it, its walls seasoned by decades of wind and silence. Most mornings were the same. The soft hiss of the kettle, the crackle of firewood catching flame, and the slow drip of coffee filling a chipped mug. He liked to watch the birds gather near the feeder, flashes of red and gray against the white world beyond the window. They were his company now, quiet, simple, expecting nothing from him but seed and stillness. Since his wife passed, peace had come with a price. The solitude he once chased now felt heavy, like a shadow that never left the room. He wrote in his notebook sometimes, just fragments, thoughts he didn't say out loud. That morning was colder than usual, the kind of cold that turned breath into smoke before it left your lips. When he opened the door to toss out coffee grounds, something caught his eye. Small, uneven shapes pressed into the snow near the porch. Not boot prints, not animal tracks either. Just a short trail, leading straight to his door, and stopping there. Tom stepped off the porch, boots sinking deep into the crusted snow. The cold bit through his coat as he crouched to study the tracks, short, uneven, dragging at the toes as if whatever made them had stumbled. They ended just a few feet from the steps where a mound of snow had gathered against the boards. At first glance, it looked like a small animal, maybe a young bear that had lost its den. But as Tom brushed the snow away, his hand froze midair. Beneath the crusted frost wasn't hide. It was hair, fine and dark, clumped with ice. He leaned closer, heart beginning to pound. The small figure was curled tightly, one arm half buried, the other lying limp in the open. That's when he saw the hand. Not a paw, not claws. Fingers. Small, 5 of them, the nails dark and cracked, the skin pale beneath the frostbite. Tom's breath caught. "Good Lord," he whispered. Carefully he turned the figure slightly. A face young, too young, peeked out beneath a layer of frozen snow. The nose was broad but human-shaped, the lips faintly parted, the chest barely rising with each shallow breath. It wasn't dead. Not yet. Instinct took over before logic had time to speak. He slid his arms beneath the small body, lighter than it looked, and carried it inside, kicking the door shut behind him. The fire snapped and hissed as he laid the child by the hearth, the room filling with the sharp scent of melted frost. Tom knelt there for a long moment, staring at the strange little being shivering in his blanket. Whatever it wasn't just an animal, it was a child, but not a human one. Tom sank into the worn chair by the fireplace, hands trembling slightly as he watched the small figure huddled under the thin blanket. His mind raced, disbelief warred with instinct. What should he do? Call someone, report it? Surely no one would believe him. And even if they did, what would happen to the child? The creature shivered violently, teeth chattering against the cold, eyes barely open. Compassion washed over his fear in an instant. He couldn't leave it there, not in the freezing night, not in the snow. Carefully, he reached for a wool blanket from the rack, wrapping the small body snugly, tucking it close to the fire. He found a small bowl and filled it with warm water, coaxing the child to sip. The hand that had seemed so alien reached out tentatively, brushing his fingers. Tom's heart clenched. In its quiet, trembling way, it was seeking trust, and for some reason he found himself giving it without hesitation. As he worked, memories came unbidden. His own son, gone now for over a decade, cold in the winter after a sudden illness. He remembered the same shivering, the same helplessness. The grief he'd buried for years rose again, entwined with this new, strange responsibility. He whispered softly, more to himself than to the child. "I've lost one. I won't lose another, not like this." The night stretched on. Tom kept vigil, adjusting the fire, checking for warmth, murmuring gentle reassurances. Occasionally, the child twitched in sleep, shivering, then slowly relaxing. By midnight, its breathing had steadied, slow and even, the small chest rising and falling with a fragile rhythm that brought him a tentative relief. Tom leaned back, exhausted, watching the faint rise and fall of the little body. Fear was still there, the impossible reality of it all, but it had been replaced in part by a quiet, steadfast compassion. In that small, shivering form before him, he saw not a creature of the wild, but a being needing care, trust, and protection. And he knew, with a certainty that startled him, that he would give it all he could. For the first time in years, the cabin didn't feel empty. The night outside howled, cold and relentless, but inside, warmth, fragile and human, began to take root. Morning light filtered through the frost-covered window, pale and quiet. The child stirred in the blanket, small movements at first, then a sudden start. Its eyes opened wide, alert and wary, scanning the room with a mixture of confusion and fear. Tom stayed still, careful not to make any sudden movements that might frighten it further. "You're safe here, little one," he said softly, his voice calm and steady. The child didn't respond with words, there were none to hear, but its gaze lingered on him, intelligent and watchful. It flexed its small fingers, then curled them back around the blanket, as if testing the world. Tom moved slowly to the cupboard and set out a small bowl of warm water and some berries he had picked the day before. At first, the child watched him cautiously, chest rising and falling in shallow breaths. Then almost hesitantly it reached for the bowl, touching it with tentative fingers. Tom nodded gently, giving it space. Minutes passed. The child began to mimic his movements, sipping the water, lifting a berry to its mouth, trying again after a clumsy drop. Each small gesture was met with a soft nod or gentle word from Tom, reinforcing the trust growing silently between them. By mid-morning, the child had relaxed further, curling beside the fire and eating steadily. Its eyes followed Tom with quiet curiosity, studying his actions, learning from them. There was no rush, no spoken language, only a slow, careful understanding forming in the shared silence. Tom observed this new bond with a steady heart. It was fragile, built on patience and care, but it was real. He realized then that this child, though unlike any human he had known, could sense trust and respond in kind. And in that recognition, a small, steady warmth filled the cabin, a sense that despite the cold outside, something important and living had returned to this quiet space. For the first time since finding the child, Tom felt a sense of hope. The impossible reality of what lay before him was still present, but it was no longer frightening. It was a beginning. Days passed slowly in the quiet cabin. Snow continued to pile high outside, blanketing the trees and muffling every sound, but inside, warmth grew with each passing hour. The small figure Tom had found began to move with more confidence. Curling beside the fire and stretching after sleep, Tom began teaching simple gestures, pointing to indicate food, lifting a hand for rest, patting the blanket for warmth. At first, the child watched him cautiously, eyes wide and alert. Over time, it began to imitate him, learning quickly through observation. Tom gave it a name, Ash, inspired by the smoky brown fur and quiet resilience he saw in the little one. Ash started following him around the cabin, mimicking small movements, occasionally looking up with a faint, hesitant smile. Watching that small spark of trust grow brought a steady warmth to Tom's chest, something he hadn't felt in years. The cabin, once silent and lonely, now held life, movement, and gentle sounds of breathing and tiny footsteps. One afternoon, while clearing snow from the porch, Tom noticed deep, wide footprints pressed into the soft snow near the edge of the woods, larger than any human, perfectly formed, moving away from the cabin and into the forest. Proof, undeniable, that Ash's family was still out there searching. A wave of conflict rose in Tom's mind. Should he call someone for help? Should he let authorities know? Or should he protect this secret, preserve the fragile trust that had formed? He thought of the world outside, curious, impatient, and often cruel to anything it didn't understand. In the end, he chose silence. Some things were meant to remain hidden, not out of fear, but out of care. Ash had found a safe place here, however temporary, and Tom would honor that. He would let the child heal, grow, and trust without interference. The world didn't need to know. Not yet. In the quiet of the cabin, with the fire crackling and snow drifting outside, a bond had taken root. Delicate, unspoken, and profound. And Tom, for the first time in years, felt a sense of purpose returning to his life. The cabin was quiet, the fire reduced to glowing embers. Outside, the snow fell softly, blanketing the world in white when a sound cut through the stillness, a long, low cry that seemed to vibrate through the trees. It was mournful, full of longing, and carried with it a weight Tom had never heard before. Ash stirred instantly, ears tilting toward the sound, eyes widening in recognition. The small body stiffened, muscles taut, fingers gripping the edge of the blanket. Tom froze. He hadn't heard this sound before, but the way Ash reacted told him everything he needed to know. It wasn't human. It was a call from home, from family, from the life Ash had been torn from. Tom sat back, heart heavy, watching Ash tremble with equal parts fear and longing. He realized the truth he had been avoiding. The child belonged to the wild, not to the cabin, not to him. For all the trust, warmth, and care that had grown between them, Tom could never replace what Ash had lost. The night stretched long. Every howl, every distant echo made Ash shift closer to the fire, curling into the warmth but still alert, still listening. Tom couldn't sleep. He sat by the hearth, hand resting on Ash's small shoulder, torn between the instinct to protect and the knowledge that some bonds are meant to guide, not contain. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the faint rustle of the wind through the trees and the echo of distant calls. Each one reminded Tom of the world beyond his cabin, harsh, wild, and unyielding. And yet, it was where Ash truly belonged. By the first hints of dawn, Tom had made a quiet decision. He would not interfere, not in a way that would harm Ash or his family. Whatever happened next, he would guide gently, trust quietly, and let the wild reclaim what was always its own. That night, the cabin felt both empty and alive, a fragile balance of care and inevitable loss. And in that tension, Tom understood something he hadn't in years. Love sometimes means knowing when to let go. Morning broke pale and cold, the cabin buried under fresh snow. Tom helped Ash into a thick blanket and stepped outside, the wind biting at his face. The distant, mournful cries still lingered in the trees, guiding him. Today he knew they would lead Ash back to where he belonged. Through the blinding snow, Tom held Ash's small hand, steadying him with gentle words. Each step was slow and careful. The deep drifts made the journey exhausting, but neither complained. Tom's heart ached with each passing moment, knowing the bond they had built was about to be tested by the world outside. After what felt like hours, the snow-covered woods opened into a clearing. And there, standing motionless against the soft gray horizon, were two towering figures, massive, silent, and watchful. Their eyes, intelligent and knowing, fixed on Ash immediately. The child paused, looking at Tom briefly, then broke into a run. The larger figure, the mother, knelt and gathered Ash into her arms, a careful, protective embrace. Tom watched as the small body pressed against the warm, enormous chest, the shivering and fear finally melting into relief. One of the figures turned slowly toward Tom. Eyes met his, deep, solemn, and full of understanding. There were no words, but he felt it clearly. Gratitude for the care he had given, for the love he had shown without trying to control. Ash looked back one final time, a brief glance filled with recognition and farewell, before disappearing into the mist with his family. The snow swallowed them, leaving the clearing empty, quiet, and still. Tom stood there for a long moment, chest tight with emotion. The wind whispered through the trees, carrying faint echoes of the cries, now softer, more distant. He knew the child was home, where he was meant to be, and in the empty silence of that snow-covered clearing, Tom realized he had been changed too. He had given care, compassion, and trust to something extraordinary, and in return he had found a sense of purpose, connection, and quiet hope he hadn't felt in years. Back in the quiet cabin, Tom felt the familiar ache of loss, but it carried a strange peace this time. On the porch, half buried in fresh snow, lay a small token, a smooth stone carved into the shape of a bird. A gift, he realized, left silently in thanks. He held it in his hand, thinking, "That night I thought I'd saved a creature from the cold. But truth is, it saved me, from a colder place inside myself." Some stories aren't meant to be believed. They're meant to be felt, In the quiet, when the world is still and the heart remembers what love really is,